Okay, the guests today on my right is David Arnold, who's composed for a range of films and television that include Independence Day, a very funky score for John Singleton's remake of Shaft, Hot Fuzz, Little Britain. To his right is Antonio Sanchez, who composed the music for Birdman even, or The Unexpected Virtue of Ignorance, which remarkably is his first film score. And to my far right is Johan Johansson. He composed the lyrical music for The Theory of Everything. Antonio, your first film, Birdman. Actually, let's talk about how you got involved in it, because it's such a unique approach to including a score in a film.
When Alejandro approached me, you know, I just love his movies. I love Alejandro. I don't know any of the directors personally or anything. Music and film is something I never pursued. Because I have a very fulfilling career as a jazz musician, and you know, it was never on my radar. I love movies and I love music, and I love Alejandro. So when he approached me about the idea of having just drums, I was like, if you want just drums in your movie, I'm your man. That's for sure. And it's interesting because the way everything started evolving, it was all so natural and organic and very effortless. You know, of course, when he approached me about it, I was elated and petrified at the same time, because elated, man, to have a chance to work with them on a film with, you know, the cast that it has, and you know, it was just an amazing dream to begin with. But also, like, not too many points of reference, what I could do, you know, how I could approach this project. But I thought, if he thinks it's gonna work, it's probably gonna be cool. And my first instinct was to try to write very organized, you know, rhythmic patterns for the main characters or for different scenes. And I sent him the demos, and he was like, you know, that's exactly the opposite of what I want. I'm like, so what do you want? Like, man, I want something really organic, spur of the moment, almost like I want it to sound improvised. You're a jazz musician, I want you to play jazz. I'm like, so that's easy, you know, because that's what I do every day, you know, on stage. So that's how it got started. I mean, it's been a crazy ride for sure.
It means my reputation is riding on this, and that's worth a lot. Exactly. Right. Fuck right. You. Yes. If this doesn't work out for you, you fuck off back to your studio pals and dive back into that cultural genocide you guys are perpetrating. You know, the douchebag's born every minute. That was P.T. Barnum's premise when he invented the circus, and nothing much has changed. And you guys know that if you crank out any toxic piece of crap, people will line up and pay to see it. But long after you're gone, I'm gonna be on that stage, earning my living, bearing my soul, wrestling with complex human emotions. Right. That's what we...
Thinking about the way that a director's relationship develops with a cinematographer, with an editor, who they always have them close at hand. That's not necessarily always the case with a composer.
Music is usually the one thing that a director can't do. You know, they could probably shoot the film, you know, they could probably edit the film, a lot of them can and do. I've worked with directors who have been the cinematographer as well. You know, they're in the cutting room, they're sitting on the shoulder of the editor. You know, there's not much of the process of filmmaking that most directors couldn't do in terms of sort of key things, or could make a hefty stab at least. But music is that thing that terrifies them a lot, because it's a language that is so specific and so removed from the practical point of lenses and lights and you know, like how many lights do we need in here? What's the aperture? What's our stop? What's our focal length? You know, these things are sort of physical things, and I know there's a huge amount of creativity goes into making those things work beautifully. But music appears to be, to a lot of directors, something which is quite terrifying. They can't really put their finger on specifics like you could with a bit of production design. You know, I always find that directors work most effectively with me when they talk purely in emotional terms, and some of them speak to you in emotional terms, some of them speak to you very specifically about instruments, and some of them don't speak to you at all. And to a greater extent, I like it when they don't really speak to me at all. I mean, obviously, you need to know what the film needs. But if they're at that point where they say, "Do you know what? You know, I'd like to hear what you've got to add to it and what you're bringing to it. And some directors do, and those are the ones that I tend to work with quite a lot. Obviously they have an opinion, and obviously they'll say something, but if they talk to me in emotional terms, I find that far more effective in terms of how I would respond to it. And it's interesting that you say that about the way that you work with Birdman. I know David Lynch does the same thing. You know, he walks through a scene with the composer, and they write stuff as he speaks to them, and they become the bedrock of what the score should be. But that impressionistic approach to a film, I think, is one of the most important things that you can do, because I think what music should be doing in a film is to abstractly represent the film away from the film. So if you hear it, somehow you feel what that film is. You know, you get an understanding of the kind of heat and the ferocity and the rhythm and the colour of it. And I've found over the years I've changed the way that I've worked. I used to work starting from the front of the film, working through to the end, scoring out each scene. But if you're scoring a scene, that's a very specific kind of mechanical job of making music fit someone moving from into a door over there, walking, stopping, talking over there, getting hit by something and then leaving. You know, I mean, those moments that you have to punctuate and get out of the way of a dialogue. There's a mechanical part of composition which is dealing with the structure of the music, but ultimately it's the music is the most important thing. And now I kind of take a similar approach. You know, it's like I'll watch a film, I might watch it once or twice and then not look at it for 2 weeks and walk around with it internally, not necessarily at a piano, not necessarily at a guitar or whatever it is that we're using, but somehow letting it sink in, and then you come up with an impression, your filter of the film's emotional core through what you're doing, and then you start coming up with ideas, and then now I write ideas like in little 2 or 3 minute suites, and won't fit the picture. It's not designed to fit the picture, but hopefully if you play it to someone, they say, I can hear the film somehow in that. So I've sort of changed a lot, but yeah, directors, emotional, far more effective than I think that clarinet might be better on an oboe.
Johan.
In my experience, the directors I worked with work very closely with editors in terms of the music, and in terms of how they sort of work the music into the film, and so it's in my experience it's been like almost like a three-way collaboration between composer, director and editor, and I regard it very much like a collaboration. For me it's like being in a band. You're working with artists of a very we're working at a very high level, and they're not musicians. They're not necessarily musical, but they have, like editors do quite often have a musical background. But it's also very different, depending on when you join the film. For example, with Denis Villeneuve, he brings me on very early, before they start shooting, and he usually invites me to the set, and I hang around and sort of absorb the atmosphere, and we have talks, and it's quite abstract. I mean, he gives me, he talks, in very emotional terms and in very sort of non-specific, very abstract, and then, for example, with Sicario that I'm working on now, I got a long 3-hour cut with no music at all. I mean, they cut it without music and without any temp music.
Do you prefer the which one?
They're both great. They're both just different ways of working, and I think I prefer in many ways being brought on earlier, because you can really become much more of a part of the DNA of the film. I think and if you're there from the beginning, and so that's a very privileged position to be in. I think to be there early on, and
you're probably far less likely to get fired as well.